So we know what a linear equation is, and we know what a linear graph looks like. Now it's time to learn about something called a quadratic and what it looks like on a graph. Basically, a quadratic is any polynomial that's to the second degree. Usually, it's going to look something like x squared plus 4x minus 1. Oh god, no. An example quadratic is going to be x squared plus 6x plus 9. So, what does this equation look like? On a graph, this equation looks like a U. Okay? If it's a negative coefficient in front of your second degree, it's going to have an upside down U, which is also a quadratic. In the same way that with a line, if it's going this way, it's a negative slope line. The one thing you notice is that it crosses the y-axis once. In this case, it crosses the x-axis twice. Sometimes it will cross it only once, sometimes it won't cross the x-axis. So the way you can find how many times the quadratic crosses the x-axis is by finding the zeros. Now we already know how to do this. We're going to get rid of this negative. We set this equal to 0, we get x plus 3 and x plus 3 equals 0. Set each one equal to 0 because they're technically separate equations. And we get x equals negative 3, x equals negative 3. So that means our quadratic is crossing the x-axis at negative 3. Now, since there's x equals negative 3 twice, that means there's a multiplicity of 2. On the graph of this quadratic, it isn't going to cross the x-axis twice, even though it shows 2 zeros. It's technically representing, because they're the same zero, it's just crossing the x-axis once at negative 3. How do we draw this quadratic? The best way to draw this quadratic is to treat it just like an equation. This equals y. And what you're going to do is you're going to plug in values just like we plugged in values into our chart for a linear equation. Remember, we do negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. It's super, super important that you use the negative 3 to 3. So here I filled out the chart. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind when plugging into this chart is that you're dealing with negative numbers. So always remember that since you're using an exponent and you're putting negative 3 to the second degree, you have to put it in parentheses, especially if you're doing it in your calculator. Otherwise, this negative is going to be forgotten. And don't forget, when you're changing your numbers when you're switching x values, you're switching both x values. That was a mistake I made in school when I was taking this class. So, we have our ordered pairs right there. Now we're going to plug it into a graph. So we remember from before that our 0 is at negative 3. So negative 3, 0, this is where it's impacting the x-axis. Then we have negative 2, 1, negative 1, 4, 0, 9. And it's going to keep getting higher, but what you can kind of tell is that right here we have a U shape. And it's going to continue growing right there. Now, this doesn't look like the U we originally created, so that's just sometimes what will happen when you're using these set of numbers. You can't do every single number. But one thing you have to know about quadratics is that they're symmetrical. So even though we don't know the points, we could easily plug the rest of the points, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, negative 7, into our original equation of x squared plus 6x plus 9. But I'm just going to show you what it would pretty much look like. So quadratics are symmetrical, so it would go up the same way. So since we had 1, 0, it's impacting the x-axis at one point. And this is known as the axis of symmetry. Okay? And this is what our quadratic equation is going to look like up here. Just like with a linear equation, you have to say that this is the equation of what you just had. So y equals x squared plus 6x plus 9. And that's how you draw a quadratic. Hey, thanks for watching this Crash Course video. To watch the previous video in this series, click here. To watch the next video in this series, click there. If you want to request a video, make sure you put it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and like this video.